Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around I am playing as the Beastmen against the Dwarves in what is probably quite a bit of a skewed matchup nowadays. This really stems from the fact that the Beastmen do have these, the Cygors, and the Cygors took a pretty significant buff in the Mortal Empires update, and they've become far more accurate. It's really made them a very brutal unit to use against the Dwarves, and so I definitely want to give him a shot and just see just how powerful this can be. Now in this composition, I did bring, for my lord, I did bring Malagor. This allows me to summon additional Cygors. As you can see, if we scroll over Malagor, actually should be able to have him separately there. And you can see he does have, of course, I did bring a handful of normal spells, but I also did bring Savage Dominion, and that allows me to spawn up to 2 Cygors over the course of a battle. Now it is very expensive as far as Winds of Magic goes at 22, but up to 4 Cygors on the field at one time is really brutal, and it means you can definitely lay the smackdown on the Dwarves, who tend to be in tight formations, slow moving, and very easy to hit. Alongside that, I did bring a few additional spells on him. I brought out Mantle of Gorok just to potentially buff some of my troops, get them a little more damaging. Devolve, of course, which is a decent AoE damage spell, and Traderkin. One of these, of course, Devolve is better against multiple combatants, and Traderkin is decent against single combatants. Both are not terrible against Dwarves. Dwarves, despite having magic resistance, are actually can take a decent amount of damage from such spells. Alongside that, of course, I do have Unholy Power for additional recharge rate. Something Wicked this way comes, so if I come into melee, I can debuff enemy leadership, and of course, Arcane Conduit for the additional power recharge rate and power reserves. So definitely, Malagor is pretty powerful. He's no melee powerhouse. He has really bad melee stats overall. Though perhaps not as bad as some of the other melee, some of the other casters, like for example Balthazar, but still they're definitely not great there, so that's not what we're bringing for. Alongside him though, I do compensate for that with 2 Gorbals. Now one of the Gorbals is coming in with, I stripped him off most items, but I did give one of them the Banner of the Fallen Kings, and the other one has both the Banner of the Fallen Kings as well as a special item here called Axe of Men, which allows it to grant the Gorbal Terror as well as Unbreakable. The Banner of the Fallen King, I also did give him Slaughterer's Call, which is a +5 melee attack boost, +8 leadership, and +8% charge bonus to all nearby units, which is definitely pretty potent. The main reason I didn't bring the other kind of mobility upgrades and that sort of stuff is just that I didn't have any points left over, and I was just trying to optimize as much as I could. For my main line of troops here, I do have 3 units of Bestigors. Bestigors are, of course, very expensive. We'll let the Cygor start teeing off on the Longbeards. The Bestigors are, of course, very expensive, but they nonetheless can chop through the vast majority of Dwarf infantry. The only Dwarf infantry that'll give them a pretty significant bit of trouble is are the Hammers, of course. Now, of course, our Cygors are starting to tee off, and the target is these units of frontline Longbeards that I'm trying to knock down a little bit before engaging. Out on the flank, I do have a single Razorgore. The Razorgore Chariot, of course, is still pretty potent. If it gets rooted down by the Thanes and their Tormentor Swords, it's definitely in a bit of trouble, but otherwise it can rampage through Dwarven backlines, causes fear, and with its bonus against infantry in it, and armor piercing, it can definitely be very potent. Alongside that, we do have 2 units of Chaos Warhounds who are slightly veteraned up, or at least on one end they are. And the reason I brought Chaos Warhounds without poison or anything is because they were fairly cheap, but they also allow me to apply some back pressure to my opponent's army, perhaps bait out some Tormentor Swords, and counteract enemy artillery, which could be counter-battering the Cygors. And finally, of course, really the key component here is the Cygors, who are already teeing off, and their target is the enemy Longbeards at first. You can see 13 models lost. The amount of damage the Cygor's boulders do is absolutely obscene, and it's definitely very potent. Now, my opponent, perhaps expecting this sort of strategy, did bring Ungrim, who of course does have his anti-large. He does have his all of his crazy little buffs. I do believe he has Stand Your Ground. It's a little difficult to get a beat on him here. And he does have the Axe of Dargo, though, which is definitely interesting. You don't see that all that often, but definitely very powerful. And of course, he could tear through my Gorbals very effectively. Now, as you can see, my opponent does have 2 units of Bolt Throwers, which he is pushing forward to try to kind of tee off on me. You can see another meaty hit there on the Longbeards, who are starting to take some very nasty damage. Of course, the Cygors do have a decent amount of damage, or HP, or armor, ammo, sorry, I can't even speak. I do believe it's 24 baseline. My Warhounds in the meantime are pushing around. My opponent has gotten a little greedy with his bolt throwers and pushed them forward to start teeing off on the Cygors. They are slightly outranged by the Cygors, who do have 400 range to the 340 on the bolt throwers, though of course they can't really counter battery very well. Now you can see the Longbeards are already getting whittled down. On the flanks, my opponent does have some Slayers, and he does have 2 Thanes with Tormentor Swords, as well as Foe Seeker and Furious Onslaught. Interestingly enough, no Runes of Magni Redbeard, I do believe, or Stromny Redbeard, I do believe, which would have buffed his nearby unit's melee attack. In the meantime, you can see I just start lobbing some rocks at the miners. My opponent does have a unit of Iron Drakes here, which can of course shut down Minotaurs or the Gorbals pretty effectively, and then 3 units of Thunders, which absolutely brutalize Bestigors. Frontline of Longbeards, of course, with their immunity psychology, is very, very tanky, and backed by the Miners Blasting Charges can definitely cause some serious work. I do decide to shift my Cygor's fire out now on the Thunderers, even as my Hounds do push in and go after the artillery battery, trying to put it down as quickly as possible, even as my main army starts to push. Over here you can see these Slayers are going to counterattack very, very quickly, and they will chop through the Chaos Warhounds with alarming speed, but I don't really care. I'm just trying to shut down these crews, get them off the guns, and prevent them from causing me too much trouble. If I can shut down the bolt throwers, if I can get them to rout before my Hounds rout, I will be set, because then my army can really engage. And honestly, Bestigors can trade very effectively against non-armor piercing Slayers, against the against Longbeards and all that sort of stuff. They just do pretty poorly against Thunderers. You can see that this gun actually does stay online. The other one was actually routed and will not really be able to come back, because by then my Bestigors will be on point. Unfortunately, the crew does not actually stay on target, and they're actually chasing after the Warhounds, who are routing off the field. In the meantime, the Thunderers are getting whittled down pretty significantly. You can see the Iron Drakes have taken a few model losses, as have these Thunderers over here, even as my Razor Gores do start their charge, and we can see kind of the charge of the piggies here, the Boar Brigade, as they plow straight through the Thunderers, and really kind of just go straight through. Unfortunately, they do get a little bit tied down here amongst the Longbeards, but I will be able to extricate them, because they do, of course, have a lot of mass. Meantime, a whole bunch of satchel charges going in on the Gorbal, not really doing very much, as he just pauses the Miners and starts applying some damage, though, of course, he stands no chance against Ungrim. Meantime, over here, this Gorbal is being tied down by some Dragonback Slayers, so I'm going to try to extricate him and get these Bestigors on top of the Thane, as well as the Dragonback Slayers, since they can trade very, very effectively with them. And you can see that we do get a little bit of an interception there and are able to start hacking them to bits. Over here, Malagor is just kind of sitting around. We have summoned, of course, an additional Cygor who is helping whittle down this area. And in the meantime, my final unit of Bestigors is now engaging on the Slayers as well as the Bolt Throwers, and really kind of chopping their way through them. It's going to take them a little while. These guys, Slayers, of course, still do hit very, very hard. Their armor piercing is actually 16, I do believe, so they can definitely be pretty brutal. But nonetheless, we will eventually whittle them down. In the meantime, you can see the Razor Gores still haven't lost any models, which is pretty crazy. And they are able to plow once again through the enemy shooting line and get into the back there. Though, of course, you can see the surrounding Gorbal is not doing too hot. He is actually baiting a lot of shots, or allowing, causing my opponent to clump and making it very, very easy for my Cygors to land hit after hit after hit. In the meantime, this other Gorbal has routed, but that's okay. Over here, the Razor Gore Chariot still hasn't lost a model. They haven't done too much damage, or racked up too many kills. They've actually done a decent amount of damage, as you can see by the 8 XP bar on them. They are now being routed off because, of course, Ungrim is a one mean fella, and he can definitely do a lot of hurt. The Iron Drakes are still okay on HP, and as you can see, though, these Dragonback Slayers are about to be chopped through, and these Slayers over here are also having a very, very bad time. Unfortunately, I completely forget about these Warhounds and just let them sit there, even as I do summon a 4th Cygor. And now the Cygors are still able to tee off. Should push come to shove, my Cygors can always engage in melee. As you can see, the Cygor over here is fighting the Thane. They have very, very bad melee defense. It's only 17, I do believe, baseline. But a 44 melee attack with 400 weapon strength is absolutely monstrous. In the meantime, the Dragonback Slayers will get overwhelmed by the Bestigors, and the Thane will get cut down by the second unit Bestigors. And it's important to keep in mind that these are actually more expensive units than Bestigors. Bestigors, while I did say they're expensive, they are the 1,000. They're actually not as expensive as actually the Dragonback Slayers, who I do believe are 1150 off the top of my head, and the Thane, who's of course at I do believe well over 1,000. Over here, Ungrim is just chopping his way through the Cygor very, very quickly. That's not surprising. Cygor once again has very, very bad melee defense and is of course large, but nonetheless, it means that Ungrim is simply not in the fight, and in the meantime the Gorbals are kind of rampage through the Longbeards, who have broken, in spite of the fact that they are immune to psychology, of course. You can see the Iron Drakes with Rollhammer torpedoes are trying to disengage, but with the Bestigors hot on their tail, they're not going to be able to get very far, since Bestigors can just chop it, hack and slash their way through very quickly. This poor Razor Gore is down to the last model, but at this point it really doesn't matter, as the Gorbal is starting to engage, and you can see the remaining Bestigors are still pretty healthy at this unit, of course, over here. Very healthy. This unit of Bestigor is surrounding the Thane, allowing the Cygor to extricate itself and start bombarding my opponent. You can see the Thane, despite definitely tying down the Cygor pretty effectively, is actually going to get chopped down pretty effectively by the Bestigors, who definitely can lay the smackdown on some units like this. Definitely, there are no pushovers. In the meantime, the Gorbal, you can see, is raking in a few kills here and there. The Gorbals didn't perform particularly well as far as kills go. You can see, finally, the Cygor does go down. He just disintegrated. And over here, you can see Malagor just popping an Arcane Conduit, chasing after these Longbeards, and the game finally is over in a Pyrrhic victory. But it was a pretty, I think, pretty decisive win. There was, of course, a little bit of bad micro for me with the Warhounds. I allowed the Warhounds, perhaps I should have pulled the Warhounds back, and then, of course, I should have remembered to re-engage the unit that did not route all the way off. And I was definitely not entirely on top of micro with the Chariots. I could have definitely gotten a better performance out of them. Now, this is nonetheless a very, very powerful build. Now, there are obviously builds that the Dwarves can do that can make this much more difficult. If Dwarves do a Vanguard build, and I think this is actually the optimal build against Beastmen currently, is to do a Vanguard heavy build as Dwarves. As silly as that might sound, I do believe it's very good because it allows you to get immediately on top of those enemy Cygors if they brought any, and they probably will. And of course, between miners and rangers, you can usually bring down a handful of chariots or something like that, and do quite good work. And you can always bring a handful of artillery pieces just to cover your frontline troops, if you or your vanguard troops. So I think that's the ideal build here. The build my opponent build is not particularly unconventional. Definitely a little thin on the flanks, which is generally not good against the Beastmen, who can go very, very wide. But nonetheless, it's definitely not weak from the general perspective. Slayers are actually pretty good against most Beastmen infantry. Longbeards are incredibly tanky and survivable. And the Thunderers can generally mow through Bestigors very effectively, and the Bolters can shut down large units. Same with the Iron Drakes. And of course the Thanes for their debuff, and Tormentor Sword and Ungrim, of course, can just tank like a boss. Unfortunately, against this sort of build, there's really not much of an answer for Cygors. You can see the Cygors raked in an immense amount of kills, and that's not counting the 2 Cygors that Malagor did summon. And obviously 84 and 68 kills against Dwarves is immense. It really is very, very powerful. It allows you to break important units, and then if push comes to shove and you're forced to engage in melee, you can always do that with a Cygor, and it still causes terror. If your opponent goes cheaper, it can terror out units and that sort of stuff. The frontline Bestigors, I think, are also really good. Bestigors are still a very solid unit. The Warhounds, I actually don't think are bad. Obviously, you could bring better artillery, you could bring actual cavalry and do well with that. But honestly, Warhounds aren't bad because they can just get on top of a bolt thrower crew and wipe them out pretty effectively, as they did in this game. They routed off one crew and beat the other crew very, very badly. And yeah, this is definitely a very potent build, I think, if you're playing as Beastmen against the Dwarves and you're looking for something to do. And I do think the Beastmen have plenty of other functional builds, but I think this is a very powerful build. The Dwarves can't really sally out against you because you can just split their attention with multiple Cygors. You can ultimately have 3 or 4 on the field, and that makes it very hard to shut all of them down. And you do have a mobility edge. You can kind of pick and choose your fights, and with the help of the Cygors, you can slowly but surely just whittle your opponent down over time. So definitely a tough situation for the Dwarves, and like I said, I think I'd recommend a Vanguard build if you're dealing with Beastmen. I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If you have any comments, criticism, any questions about the game or anything like that, be sure to post them down in the comments, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.